Good evening, everybody. Let's convene the meeting now. Let's all rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, welcome everybody. Ooh, that's loud. For roll call, we'll just note that we have all of our board members present tonight. And before we get into the agenda, I don't have any public comment forms, but I'll just check as always. Does anybody have public comment at this time? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. At this time, I'd like to bring our curriculum and instruction person, Mr. Voris, up. Dr. Ramage, he's not with you at this time, right, Mr. Voris? He's on deck. That's okay. You can be on call. You can be on call.
Daniel?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to turn it over to Daniel, and he's going to basically talk about our curriculum renewal recommendations that really cover 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, and 4.5, and then really work the whole way to 4.6 as well. And as just a reminder, obviously the board, we had this packet delivered to you last week, so you had an opportunity to take a look at it. And I know Mr. Voris is, he's going to start out really giving you a summary overview of the process that we went through. We can have questions at the end, so please, write them down as you go, and then we'll answer all of them at the end. Mr. Voris, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. So what we wanted to do this evening is come to you with our recommendations that we have ready at this time pertaining to curriculum. So as you know, we were prepared to do this last week, but that meeting couldn't occur for a variety of reasons. So what I'm going to try to do is kind of utilize the same presentation, but pare it down so that I don't take up all of the evening, realizing the 76ers are playing this evening, right? So as we look at the agenda, a couple of things that we want to do. We really just want to review with you the timelines that we followed throughout this entire process. We'll talk with you about that process, and then we'll present our recommendations for 9 through 12 science, 6-8 science, K-5 science, visual arts, health, and world language. As you know, you have this blue folder that you probably, I know you all read from front to back over the weekend. Tonight is really a summary of that. It has full details in that particular folder. There's various color-coded sections that provide you with greater detail about what I'm going to be talking about. So before we even talk about the process, we just wanted to talk about the beliefs, how we entered this process. We know that one of Pottsgrove's greatest strengths lies in our teachers. But we also know three things that tend to be true. No one set of resources is going to meet the needs of all of our students. It just can't. No one set of resources is going to make every single staff member happy. And we know that teachers make the difference, not programs. However, when we compare effective teachers with research-based programs, really powerful instruction can occur. So that brings us to the question of why. Why are we even talking about science? Why are we talking about health? In some cases, it's been 13 years since we've looked at some of these resources, particularly when we talk about science. So think in your mind about the last 13 years. What has changed in your life? What's changed in your family? Think about Pottsgrove School District 13 years ago. Think about 13 years ago, half of our district's population, student population, weren't even born yet. So a lot has occurred in the world of science in those 13 years. So it's really high time that we look at these particular resources as well as our program related to that. So looking at our process, we really want to talk about who was involved as well as the process that we followed. So who was involved? We had approximately 90 teachers involved in this process. So that includes our curriculum review teams, which were smaller subset representative groups of teachers. It also includes our 6 through 12 staff. They were all involved on our staff development days. And our K-5 staff, a wider variety of them, were involved in information sessions to learn about the particular resources both before and after school. We had about 40 people involved in that before and after school sessions. In terms of the process, our curriculum review teams, those smaller subsets of our teacher groups, really come together to look at our achievement data. They're looking at our existing materials. They're looking at standards. And they really begin the step by talking about non-negotiables. Non-negotiables is a district-created term. It's a Pottsgrove term. Simply, what are those items that our teachers think we must have? Like, we will not negotiate with those particular pieces because we believe they need to be included in our instruction and our programming. So those non-negotiables were developed. Those are included in your packet for you to see as well. From there, our curriculum review teams really began looking at a whole variety of resources. In many cases, they started looking at over a dozen. At this point, they have all the resources in front of them, print copies. However, the publishers are not there because sometimes a salesperson can sell you anything, right? So our teachers took the time to go through looking at each of these programs, using their non-negotiables, and what they did was narrow the field down to approximately 4 or 5 resources for the areas that they were looking at. Then, and only then, did we invite the publishers in, and we asked them to do a couple things: provide an overview of the resource, what it looks like, as well as teach a lesson so that we can get a feel for what is this going to look like in instruction. Particularly in some levels, we don't have a whole lot more than 30 minutes in order to embed science. So it was important for us to see, what does this look like in a 30-minute lesson? After that point in time, the teams really narrow it down to a set of 2 particular resources, and then those 2 are going to all teachers for a vote. And all teachers get a little ballot, and they do their little vote, and we'll talk about what that looked like this evening. So as we talk about our presentation this evening, there's a couple things. We're going to look at our resources that we reviewed, as well as do some resource comparisons. We'll talk about the recommendations, implications, costs, and PD. Know that I'm going to save implications for last because many of those implications transcend various content areas. And know that some of the specific information you have regarding costs with the quotes that you have in your packets, those are at this point in time. But know that that gets negotiated, that gets refined. People who were involved in this process at the committee level last year know that that number shrinks over time because we reduce shipping and handling costs. We work with our publishers to bring costs down. We determine truly what's needed. We get some free PD. All sorts of things can occur to manage those costs. But I wanted to give you an idea of where we're falling right now in terms of those costs. And then the final thing I'll talk about before I jump into the recommendations is just we were very much aware that publishers each have strengths in different areas. So one publisher might be really strong in K-5 science, and that same publisher may not be as strong in 6-8 science or 9-12 science. Or they might have a strength in 9-12 ELA and not in other areas. While we want to talk and we plan for continuity, that continuity comes with our internal planning instead of from the programs and or the resources that we use. So we'll start with grades 9 through 12 science. As I'm talking about science, just know that I'm really talking about biology and earth and space at this time. Earth and space was last updated in 2008. Biology last updated in 2010. Specifically in our sciences at the high school, we have certainly have other courses. Many of those have been updated more recently than these. And we're holding on chemistry only because the program that our biology and our earth and space teachers really looked at and are coming to you with a recommendation for chemistry is not done yet. So we're holding on that to see what that particular resource looks like before we say, yes, we'll go forward. So they began, and they're really looking at a product called Dimensions. It's through Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. By the way, you'll see that Houghton Mifflin, Pearson, and McGraw-Hill own about half the world, and probably about half of Pottsgrove for that matter. Approach recommendations, they really wanted to create a culture of scientific thinking. This was really important through the 9 through 12 teachers. And then a particular challenge that comes up for science is really we have next generation science standards and then we have PA standards. And those don't always match perfectly. One of their recommendations is really bringing those two together, marrying those two so that we're giving our students in Pottsgrove the best of both worlds. And then you can see there's some specific recommendations in terms of lab activities common to the existing courses that we have. So the cost right now, the overall cost is approximately $36,000. You can see it's just over $36,000. So how did we get here? A couple of things. Number one, all of our 9 through 12 teachers were involved in this on our staff development days, so that when we were down to the final 2 resources, all of them were involved. It was a unanimous vote. They all kind of said, this is where we want to go together as a group, as a science department. We're feeling confident about that. And then we had some conversations about where are we as a district in terms of dial? How do we leverage the resources that we currently have, particularly when we're looking at additional textbooks and or resources? So, of course, we could go the route and have a textbook for every child, a printed textbook for every student in the classroom. But we didn't necessarily want to go that route for a number of reasons. Number one is a huge cost, but number two, we have these fantastic devices that exist for students, as well as publishing companies that have caught up with the world and they provide a whole PDF version of the text. So if a child goes home, they don't have internet access at home, they can still read the full text in its entirety. But if they do have internet access while they're here at school or while they're at home, they have an interactive text that they can utilize as well, including videos, activities, mock lab kind of ideas that are included with all of that. So what we will be looking at is really building sets of both biology and earth and space texts. And if we were to do that, rather than putting a text into the hands of each and every student in the high school, or each and every student in biology or earth and space, that's a savings of $29,000. So that's the route we were going. So originally, this $36,000 was much higher, but we were thinking, how do we leverage the resources that we already have in place? If you look at the quote, you can see that there's some work. Again, I know we can do some work on that quote. For example, it includes 10.5% shipping and handling. I can assure you we won't pay that. And only 1 staff development day is included in there. Our teachers will tell you they've had a lot of staff development, particularly our reading and math teachers who have new resources this year have had well over just 1 day of professional learning about it. So that's something that we always build into these plans as well to make sure that teachers are supported as they're learning a new resource. That's 9 through 12 science. As we go to grades 6 through 8 science, these resources were last updated in 2007. They were looking at a resource called iScience. It's through McGraw-Hill. Again, you can see that they wanted to marry the next generation science standards and those PA core standards. But then they had some serious conversation at the middle level in terms of science instruction. And you can see it says, maintain domain-based approach. What in the world does that mean? So at the middle level, some middle levels will have an integrated approach in which students are introduced to earth and space, physical, and life science every year for periods of the year. Or in our case, what we've been doing and what we're recommending we continue to do is have earth and space in 6th grade, life science in 7th grade, physical in 8th grade. So what's the rationale for that? Our teachers felt that it was more focused for students so that they could have really focused learning about what each of those particular areas or domains of science look like. There's specific teacher knowledge and expertise that we have currently on staff. So some of our teachers know life science inside and out. They know physical science inside and out. And then we can honor and respect and utilize or leverage that knowledge that we already have in place. And just the progression of skills for students. Again, we had the same conversation at this level in terms of leveraging the resources we already have in place. Do we need a text for each student? Same things apply here. Although it's a different publisher, there's a PDF version of the text that's available, as well as an interactive piece anytime internet activity is available. So within this particular quote, I know we have a lot more work to do, and we can work on this number will come down. There's currently 2 staff development days built into this, but I believe with many of our quotes last year, we had, in some cases, as many as 6 days built in. And just remember when I say 6 days, sometimes those are grade level specific. So if we have 6 presenters come on one day, that really counts as 6 days, if you will. Okay? All right, K through 5 science. So K through 5 science had some different conversations, and one of their particular conversations was, we want students to learn science by doing science. We don't necessarily want kids sitting in front of a textbook We want our kids engaged in scientific experiments. We want our kids exploring why the world makes sense, or trying to make sense of that. So they were really looking at encouraging critical thinking skills, learning progressions of science, and again, that hands-on inquiry approach where students are asking questions, exploring answers to that question, and designing solutions to that question. So through that process, our teachers looked at both resources that came with the textbook, and our final two resources that we were looking at are what I will describe as kit-based or module-based. So their recommendation is FOSS, it stands for Full Option Science System, and it's a module-based and or kit-based program. So what does that mean? It means that for every module and or unit, there's 3 per grade level. So every grade level has 3 modules, 1 life, 1 earth and space, 1 physical. So our students are introduced to that on an ongoing sequence over time. Within there, for each of those modules, comes a tote, if you will, of all the materials that you would need for scientific experiments, which is why you see there's a higher cost involved in this one. So what it really does is provide our teachers with everything they could possibly need. So remember, once we get down to the elementary level, many of our elementary teachers have had numerous courses involving ELA. And then they've had about 2 or 3 courses maybe in math in their training, and not a whole lot of science. So we're working with our teachers who are, they're generalists. So we need to provide them with the resources that provide them with all the teaching materials that they would need, knowing that they're not necessarily science experts. So that's what this particular program will do for teachers. Some considerations as we move forward. This one, of course, came to a vote. We asked our teachers to vote upon 2 things when we got here. First, we asked them to vote between FOSS, which was the winner, and building blocks, which was the other candidate, if you will. And we also asked them to vote on the year of implementation. If you recall, our K through 5 teachers this year are implementing a new ELA series and a new math series. So they had a lot on their plate and continue to have a lot on their plate. So we asked them to vote, do you want to implement next year? Do you want to implement in 1920? Okay. So the votes came out to 68% in favor of FOSS, and it was 55% to 46%, 46% for next year. But there were only 6 votes, believe it or not, separating do we want to implement next year or implement the following year. So think about that for teachers who have been incredibly busy, are learning all these new resources, their classrooms have been turned up on end. They've had, I don't know how much professional development, and there's still many of them, almost half of them are saying, yeah, but we still want to do this because we need those materials. So what does that look like? Dr. Shirk, Dr. Ramage, and I, and the principals are currently talking about what does that look like so that we can make everybody happy. For some of our teachers, for example, at the 4th grade level, part of their evaluation comes from science scores. So if I'm a 4th grade teacher or an 8th grade teacher, I'm saying, yes, please, I want to implement new resources because I'm held accountable to these particular pieces. The next thing that we really had to look at the elementary level, looking at how do we get all these materials. So we could do a set for every teacher, or we could do shared, I'll call them shared sets. So there's benefits and cons to both of those options. If we look at providing sets for each and every teacher, it means every teacher has their own. That's a benefit, right? Every teacher, it's about 3 years before you have to replenish anything in any one of those kits, if every teacher has their own option. And teachers can all teach the units at the same time, okay? Some of the cons are storage issues, because each teacher could be getting 9 totes, 10 totes, and with an extensive set of resources that they got last year for ELA and math, teachers will look alarmed at me when I roll in the room with 9 more totes of it. While they'll be excited, it's a storage issue. They say, well, where do I put this? Some of the cons are just teachers are teaching at different times. There's higher costs with that. You're monitoring those use of consumables over 3 years, and again, storage issues. So if we go the shared set model, there's some benefits. It's a much lower cost for us. There's fewer materials for storage. And we can really monitor the consumables on a yearly basis rather than trying to manage that over 3 years. Cons, really the biggest con is teachers would be teaching at a different time. each of the units. So for example, if I'm a third grade teacher, I have a physical, I have a life, and I have an earth and space. I might do life in trimester 1, I might do my physical in trimester 2, I might do my earth and space in trimester 3. And my colleagues on my team might be doing something differently because we're sharing that set of resources. If we go with the shared model, it's a savings of almost $75,000 for the district. So as we were looking at these materials and having conversations, I don't know that we in our minds could necessarily justify the idea of overwhelming teachers with these materials in every room, when I think if we do the shared model, we can ensure that every teacher has what they need. They're all going to have their own teacher books or their teacher guides. It's just the sets of resources that would get passed based upon instruction. There's also a yearly replenishment cost with this, because particularly at this level, there's some living things involved in some of the investigations. So there could be frogs or centipedes. I know you're making faces. Crabs, I know one has. So all sorts of interesting creatures for observation for students. So there's a yearly cost of about $8,000, and that's recurring no matter what because of those living things that need to be replenished. Okay, that's K-5 science. Visual arts was a bit of I'll call it a bit of an easier conversation, only because you recognize, of course, that our visual arts department, they go through the budgeting process every year with their building principals. So in essence, they almost go through a curriculum review every year to say, what is it that we need for next year? So although we gave them the opportunity to kind of go through this process and look at it more globally, please recognize that they kind of do this on a yearly basis already through the budgeting process with their individual departments. They actually began last year already, although it wasn't they weren't in the cycle. They requested to kind of begin the process last year, and that was because there were new national core art standards that were released for our art teachers. So it meant they had to go back and say, okay, we had 8 standards, now I think they have 7 standards, and they said, how do we rearrange assignments? How do we rearrange projects? How do we ensure we're getting to the standards with all the coursework that we put together for students? So they already spent time last year and this year, particularly on staff development days, really looking at their goals, their structures, and outcomes for students. You can see one of the things they'll continue to do is just maintain ordering of items through the annual budget process. But a couple of things they really wanted to do, like as I've said, they've already aligned with the National Core Arts Standard. They want to continue that work. They want to examine an artist in residence program. I was talking with actually 2 of our high school art teachers this morning. And years ago, they would have local artists come in, and they would spend time with both the teachers and students, walking them through different projects. So that's something that they want to bring back to Pottsgrove. They talked about aligning all the courses for students and really designing some summer enrichment opportunities for students. I know we've heard Dr. Shirk talk about some after-school activities for students as well as summer activities for students. So I think our art department would really like to get on board and continue students' art learning over the summer and enrich those opportunities for students. So as we look at health, there's a number of things that we're considering. You can see the last resources were updated back in 2008 in health. You can see next to program recommendation, it says to be determined. That means they haven't decided on their particular core resource that they would like to use yet. What they would like to do is maintain health instruction for grades K through 8, and most of our students are taking health in grade 10, although we have a couple juniors who might take it just because of scheduling conflicts. They're looking at possibly investigating some additional electives and just ensuring the instruction of national health education standards in there. So what are some of the considerations that they're thinking about as they're examining the various texts and or resources to support students' learning of health? Their most recent staff development day, they had a lot of conversation about what are those sensitive issues in health. As we talk about health and health education, there are, of course, some sensitive issues included in there. And we need to balance what students need to learn about those sensitive issues, but we also need to know that they're sensitive subjects for our families in Pottsgrove. So how do we balance out what that looks like? So what they're really spending a lot of time doing is evaluating the textbooks to make sure ensure there's not a bias. And then, or if there is a bias, how do we supplement instruction to ensure that students are getting the most well-rounded health education that they possibly can have? So as recently as this week, our teachers got some additional health textbooks, printed resources that they're looking at. And our hope is that we come to the May committee meeting for curriculum with their final recommendation for that particular textbook. Some of the levels, just so that you're aware, really aren't looking at necessarily a textbook. Like I know our K-5 health teachers were talking, I don't know that they want a health textbook for every child. However, they were talking about having some teacher resources that they could use and hold on to. So as we go to world language, you see next to program recommendation, it says none. That doesn't mean that we don't want to do anything in world language. It means in terms of a textbook or a resource, they're not looking at adding any particular resource. Why is that? Because they've already done a lot of work in terms of utilizing a variety of sources to teach world language here in Pottsgrove. So they've really talked about accomplishing some vertical and horizontal alignment. So what do I mean by that? They're spending some time horizontally talking about all level 1 courses. So what are the skills and concepts that regardless of the language, all level 1 students need to learn in their world language? What does that look like in level 2, 3, and so on? Vertically, they're talking because they want a seamless transition as a student moves from level 1 to a level 2. How do those two courses communicate with each other so that the student's kind of moving seamlessly through that instruction and through the progression of skills? In addition to that, we're really continuing to investigate implications for enhancing a middle school approach. As you already know, we do have a middle school approach, but we're looking at what are the various ways that could look like. How could that look? And then what are the staffing, what are the costs, what are the scheduling implications for all of that? So as our world language department continues to have those conversations, we'll be coming back to you with some further recommendations there with those specific implications tied in there so that we could have a more fluid conversation about everything that would be involved with any one of those decisions. So as we talk the overall implications, as I said, I'm going to save implications for last because they transcend content areas. There's a number of things that we really need to do, and having gone through this sequence of events last year, I believe that the district has defined and identified a nice approach for this. So we really talk about K-12 scope and sequence. That means time for teachers to talk about what does science instruction look like from kindergarten up through physics, okay? So that we can really lay out what all the learning, what all the skills look like in those particular areas. We spend some time with our building principals to talk about building schedules. It's real easy to just throw new resources at anything, but we stop and have conversations with principals to say, okay, what does this look like in a particular block of time? Can we in fact do it? And we've had some of those conversations already, or we would not have brought some of those recommendations to you. From there, our teachers spend time really developing pacing calendars. So they're looking at, again, all the skills and concepts, and they're saying, how many days of instruction is this particular skill going to require in my room? And how can I pace that out over the course of a year? And if it's a tested area, how do I pace that out so that all of the instruction students need is occurring prior to the state test? They look at assessments that come with the particular resources that they're recommending, but they might also develop their own assessments, or we might have existing assessments that accomplish the same thing. So they spend some time analyzing those assessments to say, which ones do we need, which ones don't we need, what's the best way to indicate how students are going through this. Parent communication is a factor here. We're talking already about planning next year for some parent nights, just so parents have the opportunity to come to buildings, learn about the resources, but learn about what their child might engage in science instruction or in health or any one of those particular areas. Professional learning with Dr. Harney and Dr. Shirk's support, we've really had a vision for professional learning that respects where teachers are in this process. So we really have 3 ongoing goals there. Number 1 is make sure teachers have all the resources they need, make sure they have the PD, that the professional development they need to be successful with those resources, and giving them a little bit of time back in the classroom. Because every time I go out and learn something, I need a little time in my classroom because something changes because of my learning. And then just some of that vertical alignment that I already talked about in terms of the scope and sequence. Moving forward from here, what are our next steps? We really begin planning professional development. So that includes staff development already ongoing this year, as well as we had summer summits last year, opportunities over the summer for teachers to come in, learn about any new resources that would be put in place. We're already spending some time planning out what our allocation of our staff development time and days look like in 18-19, so that we can talk about those particular pieces. And then we've had a lot of success really with some in-classroom coaching, where a teacher is working side by side with a consultant, because that really builds the capacity of teachers in front of the students that they serve. So teachers have learned quite a bit through those coaching sessions, and we'll plan for continued use of that as well. In terms of next steps, we really begin to prepare for textbook adoption. So what does that look like? You all, as a board, have some time to review the resources, so we wouldn't expect for you to take this all in during one presentation, but rather tonight was kind of our first go-round at it. You have an opportunity to ask additional questions. We do have put all those resources up for review. Prior to your vote, 30 days out, we need to have it up for public review, meaning anybody from the public can come into district office and view any of the resources that we're looking at. We'll develop some parent communication sessions. Our curriculum review teams will continue to meet to make some further decisions and recommendations, and really begin planning our professional learning and what we need to do for those particular pieces. And then finally, we begin to get the materials in our hands and plan with the materials in our hands as well. So with that, I will stop and ask if there are any questions or any details that perhaps were included in your folder that I did not address in our conversation this evening.
I'm guessing this is correct, but the number for the K-5 signs was with the shared.
That's correct.
Okay, that's what I
Yep.
thought, just making sure.
That's correct.
Daniel, if I missed it, I apologize, but for that last slide you showed the next steps, what is your desired timeline for all of that to happen, up to the point where we approve it for the 30-day review and then give it the final?
So my hope will be probably Dr. Shirk and I haven't even talked about this, so Dr. Shirk, jump in if I say something incorrectly. But I think I would be aiming probably for the second board meeting in May, because that would allow for 30-day review, but it allows all of you, I have to look at the date on May, the second date in May. If not, it could be the June board meeting, so that it would have the 30-day review. Either way, it doesn't really matter, because as long as we know we have your support as we go through the process and looking at any of these materials, we can begin working with teachers on professional development and such to kind of begin the process. So at the latest, we would aim for the first meeting in June to accomplish and get textbook adoption there. Textbook adoption in PA has to occur between April 1st and August 1st anyways. So.
I look forward to reviewing some of the new resources. Is it possible to also see the current resources in science to see why our current resources can't be used with, adaptations for things that have changed, or, new sciences that have been realized or whatever? Still concerned about that. To justify the cost to the taxpayers, why can't we use what we have? But if I'd be able to review that, or whoever would like to, that would be helpful.
Those materials are available, not necessarily in my office, but I can easily get them in my office, so they're all in one location, so that anybody who wanted to review that will be able to do so.
So another question regarding this K-5 science. Is it just barely, but the majority, you said, wanted to wait a year. But the question, and thank you for surveying them, by the way, I appreciate that. What were they told last year, though, when they were being given the math and ELA? Were they told they would have a certain, time to integrate the new curriculum before, or new resources before the new was put in?
Our teachers are well aware of the curriculum renewal process that we have in place and the timeline associated with that. As we went through the process last year, to be honest, I don't recall having a conversation in terms of when new things will be coming. However, we did stop and ask them to vote upon that this year. And quite honestly, we have very varying opinions in that particular area. We have some teachers who feel strongly, who say, please wait until 1920. And we have other teachers, as I've already described, who say, no, I can't wait another year. I need these resources next year. So we're aware of that. What Dr. Shirk and I have, and Dr. Ramage have already begun planning with the principals is how do we kind of keep everybody happy for next year? Honoring those people who want to move forward, but also supporting those people who aren't quite ready to move forward. How do we bring everybody together at the same time? So we talked about a number of options that could look like. I'm confident that we can accomplish that, particularly starting now, following this meeting. I'm already going to be going out this week and having conversations with our teachers about how did things go at this meeting, where do I think things are going, so that they're aware of the process moving forward.
In regards to the shared model, and I apologize if you said this, are the teachers comfortable with the idea of, not all being at the same place in that curriculum?
To be totally honest, we didn't necessarily have that conversation yet. When we went through the process originally, I know many of the teachers were talking about having the materials that they require. All teachers are going to have the materials that they would require. It just means everybody doesn't necessarily have their own set of those materials. So I don't feel like I'm going back on anything. One of their non-negotiables, in fact, was all teachers need to have the resources that they need to conduct hands-on inquiry-based science instruction. We can keep that promise, but we can do it in a cost-effective way, as well as offering them some storage opportunities that I know some of them are worried about. That would be part of our continued conversation with those teams to talk about what that model really looks like.
Has there been any discussion if you have a shared model, as to what the implications would be to the other materials that wouldn't be covered? For instance, let's say Module 1 takes X number of hours, Module 2 takes Y number of hours, X not being equal to Y. Has there been any discussion as to how that adjustment's going to be made?
So luckily for us, there's 3 modules per grade level, and luckily for us, we have 3 trimesters. So it kind of fits within our existing system. One of the things that the elementary teachers had a lot of conversation about is what does this look like in a 30-minute block of time? And Josh or Sharon, feel free to jump in. I don't know if I have any other elementary or any other teacher. That was a particular conversation that they had in terms of, I don't have really one more second than 30 minutes to accomplish science instruction. What does that look like? So when we had the publishers come in, they were doing model lessons, and we timed them. We gave them 30 minutes, and when 30 minutes was up, we said, your time's up. Because we needed to see what that looks like in 30 minutes, in addition to what does that look like over the course of a trimester. So can a teacher accomplish each of the 3 modules in each of the 3 trimesters? And their feeling was, yes, they can do that. They spent a lot of time looking at the recommended pacing that comes with the program in terms of the number of days. And then we would spend some time pacing that out per grade level so that they'd be able to accomplish those tasks.
Okay, as a follow-up, in those 30-minute preparations, were there kids present or were there no kids present? Because from my own experience, when kids are present, things go at a different pace.
You're absolutely correct. And in a first year of implementation with any new resources, it takes a bit longer. Our teachers know that well this year. So it might say 40 minutes in a book, but your first year of implementation takes a bit longer because it's your first time through it. Kind of like your first time driving somewhere. Hopefully it takes you a little bit longer than it takes today, and you're not speeding there. So yes, those conversations will continue to occur. Part of our summer curriculum writing experiences are teachers having these exact conversations where they say, how much time do we need? What is that going to look like in instruction? Do we need to modify building schedules at all so that they can accomplish those tasks?
Daniel, it's not so much a question, maybe just a thought or a suggestion, but one of the things that's crossed my mind often lately is that it might be of value to the board to be able to see some of these ideas in action. So we have these new kinds of educational programming coming online here potentially. So, for example, hands-on science modules at the elementary level or digital textbooks in the high school that have interactive text and mini labs, self-paced kind of things. It might just be an idea, and I'm not talking about the next meeting in order to get the approval, but just at some point in time so that the board can see what this new stuff looks like, because I think it sounds great in theory, and it's good that we're moving forward. But then again, at the same time, some of us have, the last thing we saw was a textbook, and we know how that works, but these things sound great, and I think it's great that we're starting to use, not starting, but we're getting better at using this technology that we invested so much in over the past few years. So whether it's, one of the meetings that we have at one of the schools where the students are involved, or just having a teacher maybe come in and deliver 10, 15 minutes of a lesson, how that looks from a digital textbook. I just think that might be nice for the board to understand that better.
We can, it's a great idea. We can absolutely accomplish that.
If it's okay with the board president, I wonder if there's any teachers in regards to the science that have any comments or thoughts on any of this discussion?
They're free to talk at their own will, but let me just say, we owe them a huge amount of thank you, because the teachers, not just the individuals in this room, but teachers at large, they've spent incredible amounts of time really collaborating with one another. We could not accomplish this without their support. So the amount of time that they put into this process and how seriously they take it and their dedication to the process is really to be commended. So if you see them on the street, thank them truly, because their work is truly amazing. But with that, any teachers that are here that would like to talk about the process, or?
I heard a throat clear back there.
Unless you want to talk.
Oh, that's why I stood up, but that's it.
I'm Dave Moore. I'm a K-12 instructional and curriculum coach here. One of the things that stood out for me going through all of this is that how we approach the education of students in science is vastly different than it was from even 5 or 10 years ago. All of the materials that we have looked at reflect that. None of the materials we currently have contain that. So things like the scientific method look drastically different. We're not so focused on prescribing science. We're focused on having students inquire, discover, learn, put things together on their own, which I think is a very valuable experience and will really help deepen their understanding of science as they move through from K to 12. It's reflected in both the print materials that we would have. It's reflected in the digital materials that we would have with this. It begins to incorporate other areas. Like we're beginning to see now into science come some of those writing initiatives, those writing standards. TDA is a big part of the PSSA. Science doesn't necessarily use the TDA, they're using the claim evidence response model, but it's the same concept. So now we have this brand new way of teaching our students, and at the same time we're going to begin to support some of those other disciplines. Along with that, the big face now, the textbook, when I was in the classroom teaching earth science, it didn't mention STEM at all. A lot of these new materials, they're making those STEM connections. You're starting to see those more direct and explicit connections to those STEM principles. So, I mean, these are a lot of the things that I think the new materials will allow us to have that the old ones just aren't going to be able to support. That's all I have.
Can I just add a comment, personal comment? I was a judge at a science fair many years ago where we had to, quote, judge the scientific method, follow this thing. And with all due respect, I don't mean to be insulting a great chef and a great TV show, but I called the scientific method Martha Stewart science. You followed a routine. And I got concerned because I'm only an engineer, so I'm not a scientist. So I went to a biologist who is by most standards a scientist. And I said, quoted the Martha Stewart method, and I said, is this what you do when you do science? And there were a couple of expletives, but the short word was no. And I said, good, because that's not what I do when I do science. And one of the things in this book, I've begun to review the biology text, you know that, is to get a sense of what science is about, the inquiry, the fact that you're like the old bloodhound running around sniffing for a scent, and when you find the scent, then you follow it. And that's the fun part. That's what gets kids turned on. It's not a diagram of a flower with all these Latinate names that I promptly forgot when I took biology many years ago, and I relearned when my son got married to a biologist. So somebody actually uses those words. But yeah, I think what this program does is give a different emphasis to the way science is done. And it was a thrill read to go through the biology text, and I found one equation, which, you know, as a computer programmer and a software engineer, kind of made my heart bleed a little bit. But I also understood you're talking to a bunch of kids, and they don't want to see differential equations. So, you know, I think this is a good step in the right direction.
Just moving, can we move on from science? Is there any, I don't want. Comment on visual arts, and then a question in the implications. In regards to summer enrichment opportunities, I'm kind of concerned when I hear things like that. Certainly open to hearing details and specifics. Just, I feel like if we're going to be asking the taxpayers to be funding beyond our 10-month, you know, school year, then we need to hear more from them, their willingness to do that. That's my opinion on that. In regards to the alignment, the vertical alignment, I had the same question and concern when we brought in the ELA and math resources that we did last year. Using the different companies and aligning vertically, there's a lot of discussion within the grade levels, what's the best resource, but I didn't hear much conversation, and I could have missed it, between the you know, elementary and secondaries. And is that worth a conversation to say, you know what, yeah, this has this, this, and this, but in regards to flow from, you know, one grade to the next, maybe we should go with this program, you know what I mean? That's my only comment.
So those questions, again, they really get, I guess I could answer that in a number of ways. The first is in many occasions, we try to put our 6 through 12 science teachers together, or 6 through 12, any content area together on staff development days. And that the value of that is for them to share the progression of learning. What does that look like over time? What is it specifically that we're teaching? And if I'm teaching this in grade 8, what do you need them ready for in grade 9? Whatever grade 9 holds for that particular student. So our teachers have had those conversations, but they need to continue to have those conversations. We need to continue to provide the time for those conversations so that they can have that, exactly as you said, that vertical conversation in terms of what is it that students need. How do we go from one set of resources and or a building to another set of resources in a different building, knowing that the resources doesn't define our curriculum.
Does it necessarily, I'm probably somewhat off here, but does it necessarily work the same way with science, just considering that it's earth science, life science, physical science, biology, chemistry, physics, versus like math that continues to build on itself, even
You're right.
ELA continues to
It's a
build
bit
on
different
itself?
than the conversation we would have had last year with regards to math, K-8 or K through Algebra 2, for example. Because we know there's a finite set of skills for each of those particular areas. But when we get into the science arena, we know we have this domain-based conversation that occurs, so it's less, and it becomes pretty specific once we get to the high school level. So, for example, if I'm taking physics, I'm taking bits and pieces from the science I've learned from other areas, but there's no necessarily course that, if you will, like equates to physics or was like the prerequisite, if you will, for physics. Because they become more specific. Absolutely, yeah. I'm not saying that students are not taking value from the learning that they've had in other courses. It's certainly supporting their learning in those other science areas. But it's not like 6th grade math to 7th grade math. Yeah. You're welcome.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, board, for listening. And as we continue to work through the process, I would ask you that any questions, just please get them to us so that we can continually answer them. And obviously, our next curriculum instruction will continue with the conversation where we left off tonight as we work toward getting board approval in the next several weeks. As long as no one gets sick or doesn't snow.
You know, it did start snowing right after I got off the phone. It did. I looked outside, I was like, it's snowing.
Okay, we'd like to continue our board meeting with Section 5 action items for personnel. We're going to start out with the administrative appointment. We're asking the board a recommended action to approve the administrative appointment as submitted 5-1.
I'd like to make a motion to approve personnel 5-1, 2, 3, all personnel.
Can we just take out 5.1?
Supervisor motion is
Okay.
5-2 through 5-8. Second.
Thank you, Bob. We have a motion and a second to approve 5-2 through 5-8. Any questions or comments on these? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you.
Moving back to 5-1, I need a motion to approve the administrative appointment as submitted.
So moved.
Okay, a motion and a second to approve 5.1. Questions or comments on this one?
I would like to amend the motion. The sentence that says it's contingent upon the hiring of an athletic director. I don't have an objection to that, but I would like to add and reduction of other administrative staff by 1 to offset the new hire of the athletic director. You can have your athletic director. You can move Mr. Drenzo, but I need to have 1 fewer administrator in the central office.
Okay.
That's my motion.
That's your motion.
Nobody seconds it, it's done.
Fair enough.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, so
But she has to agree. She made the motion, she has to agree to amend. She has to agree to amend, right?
You have a motion and a second, then you have an amendment, and a second of the amendment. Is that your second, Scott?
Yes.
Okay, so you're going to first vote on the amendment, and then depending whether it passes or fails, you'll go back, to the underlying motion with or without the amendment.
Right, that makes sense.
So the question was, Patty does not have to agree to, the original maker of the motion does not have to agree to the amendment.
You can agree, and the seconder can agree, but right now, you have a motion on the floor, you have a motion to amend. So I would suggest that, I don't know, keeping it cleaner, to make it simpler at least, let's vote on the motion to amend, If you're against that amendment, certainly vote no, and then we'll go back to the underlying motion.
Okay, so we have a motion to amend and a second to that motion. Do we have, how about some questions or comments around that?
So I'll just make my comment now to both the motion and the amended motion. I'm voting no to the Director of Community Relations. I'm not at the point of saying, okay, that, just get rid of another administrator, but I want to be clear that I'm not voting no because of the person being requested to fill that position. I'm voting no in disagreement with the position itself of Director of Community Relations. I believe there's two things that, quote, sell a school district, and that's two main things, scores and taxes. So when people are considering where they're moving. So I'm voting no to the Director of Community Relations piece. So I'm voting no to both the motion and the amended motion. If Dr. Shirk comes back and says, I want to finagle it, that's, whatever, then I'll look at it at that time. But that's where I'm at.
And, oh yeah, sure.
I just want everybody.
Okay, so the amendment was that if we approve the Director of Community Relations and Co-Curricular Programs position as well as a hiring of an athletic director, that we eliminate one other administrative position.
No. We say hire a community relations director, hire an athletic director, but get rid of somebody else.
Well,
That's
let me suggest.
That's what I understood.
Let me suggest that they're, depending the position and how we do it, I'm not sure we can just get rid of another person. That's problematic because of, depending on the position of their professional employee, they have vested rights in that position. So Bill, I don't know if you want to take this off the agenda tonight and discuss that further with the board before we do something that may have an unintended consequence?
I rescind my motion.
I'm sorry to hear you, Bob.
May I rescind my motion?
You certainly may, if the seconder will agree. That's Scott, I forgot, I couldn't remember. Need a new name, give you a new name. He's Scott, I just couldn't remember who seconded the motion. Yeah, if they both agree to take that off the floor, we're back to the original motion.
Okay, so then with agreement from both Mr. Lindgren and Mr. Hutt, we're back to the original motion, which is for the approval of Gary Dorenzo as to be appointed as Director of Community Relations and Co-Curricular Programs, effective date being contingent upon the hiring of an athletic director. So questions, comments on that motion? Okay, then all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay. That is a 7-2, I believe.
Moving on to action items for business. We start with 6.1, speech therapy contract. We recommend approval of the contract for speech therapy services provided by independent contractor SLP CCC BCBA Sue Cleaver at a rate of $70 per hour.
So moved.
Motion and a second for 6.1. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay.
Moving on to 6.2, resolution opposing the closure of the Pottstown YMCA. We ask the board to approve the resolution opposing the closure of the Pottstown YMCA as presented.
Motion and a second to approve the resolution. Any questions or comments on this? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay.
6.3 E-rate application services agreement. We'd like the board to authorize administration to execute the agreement of E-rate application services for the 2019-20 funding year with Montgomery County and Marine Union at a cost of $6,000 per year.
I'd like to make a motion to combine 6.3 through 6.10.
Second.
Can we take out 6.3, 6.8? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'll get us back started by making a motion that we approve 6.3.
Second.
So a motion and a second. Questions or comments?
Just FYI, I'll be voting no. I'm still not convinced, as I've said in the past, that with the number of administrators we have, including those in the business department and secretarial staff, that we can't do this ourselves as some other districts do.
Any other questions or comments? I'll just make one, Bill, just my observation, maybe to the contrary, but at a fee of $6,000, if we have somebody internally do it, that's also, there's also a cost related to that. So it's not it's not an even wash. I don't know what the difference is. I just want to make that point that nobody's time is free. So, okay, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No.
Okay.
I make a motion to combine 6.4 to 6.7.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second to approve 6.4 to 6.7. Any questions or comments on any of these? All right, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Moving on to 6.8, fund balance commitment. We ask the board to commit $129,497 to fund balance to defray future vocational technical expenses.
Oh, I'll go so moved then, Kathy, and you can, or Patty, and you can go second.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
So, okay. A motion and a second for 6.8, which is the transfer of $129,500 of fund balance to defray future vocational technical expenses. Questions or comments?
Comment. I just like to thank you for putting that in the budget. It means a lot for the Western Center because I know we don't have anything over there. So I just want to make sure you know it's appreciated.
For the sake of the committee, or the community, sorry, can you, Mr. Nestor, describe what you mean by commit these funds?
Fund balance is comprised of three different types of items. What is typically considered fund balance is the uncommitted fund balance. That's what's available to pay ongoing expenses of the district. Then there are assignments and there are commitments. Assignments are something that would come up towards the end of the year that there may be some reason to assign a portion of this year's fund balance to cover an expense for next year. That can be done by administration. We typically don't do that. A commitment is a board action saying we're going to take this money and we're going to earmark it for this purpose. And in the future, sometime when the purpose arises, the need arises, we can use it for that purpose. Or at some point in the future, if the board in place at that point in time no longer sees a need for that commitment, they can decommit the money. But it's basically saying that this money that we're talking about is the result of surpluses generated at the Western Center over the last couple of years. There are going to be times when we're going to have to either do some, contribute to some repairs or have a budgetary increase at the Western Center more than what we want to absorb within our operating budget. This is the board committing to use these funds to reduce those types of expenses in the future.
And Dave, just to be clear too with that is, over at the Western Center, we have no capital fund at all. And what we decided is we would control it here. Is that correct? Yeah.
How is that 130,000 reflected in next year's budget? Is it just not seen at all?
It's currently sitting in the fund balance of the district. We're just carving it out and earmarking that portion of fund balance to be used for the Western Center. So in the year that you have the additional cost, you'll still have the expense in the budget. We'll just use that portion of fund balance rather than tax increases to cover that component.
Somebody gave me the wrong button, I don't know. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any further comments or questions? Thanks for the explanation, Dave and Patty. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay.
Okay, moving on to 6.9, interfund transfer. We're asking the board to approve a transfer of $784,269 from the general fund to the capital reserve to fund, the capital reserve fund as presented.
Motion and a second. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay.
610, agreement for an expert witness services. We ask the board to approve the contracting with Capital Project Management, Inc. for expert witness services in the amount not to exceed $40,000 as presented.
Motion and a second. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay.
Moving on to 611, proposed final budget. We're asking the board to adopt the proposed final general fund budget for the 18-19 in the amount of $67,555,331. The millage increase needed to fund this proposed final budget is 1% for a total millage of 38.242. The estimated ending uncommitted fund balance for the 18-19 school year is approximately 6.84%. I just,
Second. All right, we have a motion and a second. Questions, comments, and I'm sure we'll have some discussion.
I thought there was an email that went out regarding this, but I'm not hearing the concern brought up. I'll be voting no myself, though. I understand it's a proposed final budget. We're not adopting it at this time. But I still see plenty of room in the budget where it could still be at least at a zero.
If you could actually, Dave, in regards to the plan and understanding as into how this is more of like a formality of what we have to do, giving our time when we actually are not going to approve the final budget until June 12th. So what is this actually giving you more time, if I'm not correct?
The approval of the proposed final budget is a scheduled item that is required under Act 1. And it must occur at least 30 days prior to the adoption of a final budget. So the way our board meetings schedule falls at this point in time, the 30 days will not occur by the second meeting in May. So the next meeting, first meeting that would be available that's been scheduled at this point would be the June 12th meeting, I believe.
Correct.
So what this does is this, as I said, it's a scheduled component of Act One. We have to pass this, have to pass a proposed final budget. It doesn't mean anything more than we checked that box, we've complied with the law. We still continue to evaluate cuts to the budget or increases to the budget as the case may be. And we will continue to do that over the course of the next 6 weeks. We do have a plan in place which could get us to a zero if things don't change. But there are still some very large question marks out there. We have to refine our estimates on our tuitions, which has been one of our largest cost drivers this year, to determine what that's going to play out to be next year. We want to be as accurate as we can. We have not had an opportunity to do that yet. And the biggest question mark out there is what is the state going to provide in the form of funding to public education this year. We've budgeted based on the governor's proposal, but it's been pretty silent as far as what the legislature is looking at from their perspective on the budget. And we will probably not hear that until somewhere around the second meeting in May, when we start to actually hear conversation. That's just a guess, but historically, they like to get through the primary before they start talking about anything. So this will give us time to factor in any changes in that area, refine our projections, and see if anything else crops up in the next month that we have not seen yet. But there is a plan in place, and if nothing astronomical happens, we feel confident we'll be able to reduce this and hopefully get to a zero.
So, thank you for the, I'll go out on a limb a little more maybe and say, so over the course of this budgeting process this year, we've asked for a 0% tax increase solution, and everybody on the administration has worked with the board to do their best to deliver that. We believe that we have a path there, but there are some variables. So we have two choices to make on a proposed final budget. We can propose a 0% tax increase and possibly something changes, and then we have to go back on that. Or we can propose a 1% tax increase in our final budget with the confidence that things won't change and we're going to get down further, most possibly to zero, maybe less, maybe more. We don't know yet. So I think what the what Dave, you and Dr. Shirk and everybody worked on this feel is the responsible suggestion is to err on the side of being conservative at the 1% and have the confidence that we can get better than that, as opposed to committing to zero now and then having to, which we could just as easily have to go back on that statement and go back up to 0.5% or 0.75%. I just want to be clear on that, and I've been sitting through this same conversation for years now, as many of us have, and we always say, it doesn't mean that we're tied to this number. It just means that this is what we feel the most safe about right now, but we're going to continue to work. So, I mean, I get all the points of view here. I just wanted to get my point of view out there. That's the way I see it, and I think that's what we're saying here tonight. As much as people don't want to hear the 1%, I don't either. But we are committed that we're going to continue to work. And, you know, in my 5 budget seasons, it's always gone to plan. It's you know, we haven't had any surprises, but that doesn't mean we can't. So I get where the responsible estimate comes from. That's my point of view.
I would like to echo Mr. Alexander's comments and just say that I think I fully expect to vote for a 0% increase when we go to the final. Fully expect that. On the other hand, we have asked the administration right the way along, and for several years now, to come back with zero increase options, and they have worked very hard to do that. They are asking us as a gesture, I would say, as a gesture to them, in case something goes wrong, we want to make it not as bad for the public as if, as if they say, they hear zero and then you change it. And I think as a gesture to say thank you for your effort, we still expect the zero, but if something goes drastically wrong that is out of our control at the state level, that we understand there will be some work that will be done. And we're still going to want to get as close to zero as we can, but we're recognizing your effort and not tying you to a tree in case, something happens that you can't deal with. That's why I'm voting for it. I understand, I agree with you 100%, but I want to give them a little bit of wiggle room and recognize the work that they've done so far.
I appreciate that perspective, and that pretty much helps me change my vote. As long as there's a sense that there's a third option, that if craziness happens, right, and we can't get to that zero that we're all hoping for, that the administration can still go back and see what other changes can be made to the budget. As long as we're still open-minded to that, I hear you, Bob, and I support that.
Yes, we have an easy option, and that is fund balance. We've got money sitting there and that are available as a last resort sort of thing to offset what I believe in a reasonable frame of reference is the maximum change that we could expect. I know that we can cover that with fund balance. Not our ideal, but possible. Do either of you disagree? Okay. But yes, you're right, other options.
Well, I wasn't thinking fund balance personally. I was thinking what can be trimmed back. Because I don't think we want to cut into fund balance too much to cover a budget. That's one of the many wise things I hear from Dave each year. Be careful because this will affect us next year.
Can I just share something else? I do want to point out to you that the district's expenditures have gone up $1.6 million this year. We have cut. We've cut very drastically to get as close as we are. So finding more, while it sounds like it should be easy in a $67 million budget, a lot of that has already taken place. So it's going to be difficult to find more without some pain.
And Dave, I fully recognize that. Dr. Shirk, I do. We've talked about it. I also fully recognize that, and I'll just say it, it's not sustainable over the long term. Expenses will still rise. My main goal and concern has always been to make sure that the money we spend is money well spent and there's a return on our investment. I know we've made some missteps over the years with that, in my opinion, but I think we do a lot better now. And, I would recognize you on the day we approve the final budget, but I'll recognize it now. I know a lot of work was done and has been done over the years, and also this process continues to be more transparent and less painful for the board and everyone else. So, I think we're doing all the right things. I really feel strongly about that. And when the day comes that we just can't get to zero because of increases like $1.6 million, and that only continues to rise because of inflation, if nothing else, then when we do have to ask taxpayers for money, that we do our due diligence to make sure that we're spending that money wisely on the things that we need to in order to have our students achieve success and have our district be that district of choice. So I get what you're saying there, and I know it can't last forever, but every year we just bank on something good happening, and mostly I think we pull something out. You always pull something out. So, but pretty soon. Okay, so are we at the Do we have any more comments or questions? So we take a vote on this. So to approve the proposed final budget, all in favor? Aye. Bless you. Opposed? Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Board. We appreciate your support, and as we said to you before, throughout the budget season, that our goal continues and will be the zero, and I think the next couple of weeks will help us make that a clearer picture for you. We do have facilities and op coming up. I think we could, update numbers, really the next 2 weeks as we move forward. We can give you updates working to June 12th along the way to help you, help you and help us better make that decision on June 12th. Moving on to 6.12, the elementary projector project. We asked the board to approve the awarding a contract for the replacement of projectors in the elementary schools to E+ Technologies in the amount of $370,599 as presented.
Says accelerated failure. How much sooner are we planning on replacing these than we? No, sorry.
Okay, motion and a second. Start over.
I'll reiterate it. How much sooner are we planning on replacing these than we wanted to?
1 year.
I had a question in regards to, I believe this actually came up at the Facilities Committee. What was the recommendation of the Facilities Committee? Because I don't remember hearing the recommendation.
That's correct. We did not either come to a consensus or take a vote, and we do not have a recommendation to the board at this time in favor of. What we have are 3 individual opinions, so that's where we are at the moment. There has been some question about the efficacy of using these. I remember I was on the board when we first went to computers, and the computers were all the thing. Yeah. And then the next thing came along was the smart boards. The smart boards were going to be the best thing since sliced bread, and we went in whole hog and bought those. And now we hear nothing about them. They're probably still being used, but I hear nothing about them. And now we are replacing at the cost of $350,000, a third of the projectors in the buildings. So we're looking at another $1 million for projectors that last maybe 5 years, maybe at the outside 5 years. I want to see results before I continue to spend $1 million sort of every couple of years on these projectors. I want to see results. I have not seen results. We're being told to wait for it, but the spending's got to happen right now. I'd like to see them go hand in hand. The spending matches, the results match, or the results get ahead of. That's what I'd like to see.
Question, my understanding is there's another Facilities Committee meeting before the June 12th when we have the final budget? Is that correct?
That's correct.
I'd like to make a motion to table this so that the Facilities Committee can use the next meeting to come back with a recommendation as into yay or nay.
Second.
Okay. Logistically, I'll just ask a question about that. I don't know what's on the docket for the next facilities meeting, but since we just approved the proposed final budget, can I assume that next meeting, we'll get to talk about facilities? I know that, we always run out of time. I know. But we always run out of time because we're in budget season. That's the operations committee as well, and we talk budget details. So would we be able to dedicate, it sounds like we need to. I don't know what the plan is, but if we need to, get that meeting on for an extra half hour or whatever we need to make sure that we can make that happen and prioritize it, then that's my only concern, if we're going to do that.
I'm fine with that. You asked for results. Where's our control group? Where's the group that does not make any other changes, no difference in teachers, no map testing, nothing, that only has, here's the group with the smart boards, here's without, and we don't have that. And I understand, I would like to see results as well, but just as easily to say we haven't improved in scores, you could just as easily say, we're here because we had them. Without them, we would have been back here. We would have been much worse. So maybe instead of trying to come up with showing results which we don't really have a clinical scientific way to do, perhaps we could have some feedback from teachers that use them in classroom to hear how does your classroom better because of this? How does it improve it, or how does it hinder it? Maybe that would help me. I mean, I know for my wife being a teacher, I've asked her because she's gone from chalkboard all the way up to smartboard. So I know her feelings on it and her, but I would like to hear from our teachers because I think that's going to be the results that I would like to see. That where they can say, wow, or meh. So that would be my opinion on that. And asking this now so that perhaps by the next facilities meeting, we could have, some from each side, and not just all one. I'd like, so.
And I would just say, that's a good point. I'd agree with it if the scores were where we would like to see them. So then we're saying, well, what caused this? But then where's the control group for that, But we still haven't seen, I don't think we're at where any of us want to be, you know what I mean? So there's not, so we didn't get there yet, but.
Well, okay, we haven't gone there with the Pennsylvania testing. Now, when we look at the MAP scores, it shows that we are, which is a national, actually used globally, but just deal with the national, we are higher than average there. So, I mean, I put more faith in something that is done by more than one state than a for-profit business in Pennsylvania. So.
But there are districts who are successful with the scores with the PSSA.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'll just suggest that's a discussion for another night. I do agree with you, Jim. It's not a controlled experiment. So we can't say after this because of this, right? So just because we started using these, our scores got better or they got worse, or we do a lot of things, we change a lot of things, and the state changes a lot of things every year. So hard to draw that line, but I agree with Bob in the aspect that $1 million investment every 5 years is something that we should feel good about supporting. So there's got to be a way to make everybody feel comfortable, at least, for the committee to come to a consensus on a recommendation to the full board. There's got to be a way to do that. What are, there's studies or there's teachers or, again, like I mentioned to Daniel earlier tonight, let us see what these things do and, convince us that way, or we have to do something, or, data, experience, all that, to get consensus.
And could we maybe, if Tony can maybe give us we have the 10-year facilities budget, maybe something for this as well to say this would be over the next X number of years, at here, because if I understand correctly, what you're looking to replace allows for less maintenance upgrades, so you can just replace out certain parts. So maybe some sort of projection over not a 3 or 5, but 10, or, granted in 10 years, the technology, who knows where it'll be. But to give us a better long-term projection, it would be really helpful as well.
I appreciate the discussion of the board. Classrooms today really the projector is a tool. It's something that's used every day. I understand the value. You're looking for value of this tool. I think if you took it away, I honestly don't know how our staff would react. I guess they're passing out more paper, more pencils. They're not interacting with everybody per se. They're using a whiteboard instead. I guess there's ways around that, but I think I would want you all to hear that from them, because I think you'd be handcuffing them. I'm speculating. I think they'd really feel like we wouldn't be supporting them with tools in their classroom. I do understand the assessment piece, and that's why we made the commitment with new curriculum in the last 2 years, because one of the board members, I remember saying, why wait? Why are we waiting? I remember that, and I apologize for who said it. I'd give you credit for that, but we didn't wait. We got after it with ELA and math. Our staff rose to the occasion and stepped up to the plate. They've had a great transition year. We've made our adjustments on a grade level basis or a building basis. We've invested in MAP. We are seeing growth, with our students. We invested in ECRA, the analytic tools that's going to give you everything you need to evaluate us. There's no transparency. It's as clear as window as you could get, okay? And the one thing I always say that I want you to remember, because I'm someone who's been in our community, this community from Pottstown to Phoenixville to Springford, Upper Perk, remember who we're servicing, okay? Remember who our clients are, okay? And remember who the clients are in other districts. Because what I find out with the analytics now that we're using with ECRA, and they've even enhanced the product, so you're going to find out even more information, i.e. how our athletes are doing, specifically pulling them out and comparing to people who aren't involved in sports. Like, we've had those conversations, thinking, boy, extracurricular and sports, those kids always do better versus, well, we're going to be able to find that out. We could never even have those conversations before. So the positive thing for me is you've supported us with assessment, with the analytic tools, with curriculum and instruction, with technology. We've had a solid year under our belt. When you think about how the history's been, this past year is really this will be a true test, even though it's transition with our teachers. I mean, getting used to the curriculum instruction piece, that they'll have an opportunity to we'll be able to really show you how we did. And I can sit here and feel confident that it's a true picture, okay? And it will be a true picture of what we need to work on or what we need to accelerate. But I think you've set us up, the Pottsgrove School District, for success. Make no mistake about it. Your time and your efforts and your financial support, really, to me, it's a proud thing. I'm looking at this like, this is a great seat to be in because you've given us all the tools we need. And I see my colleagues and they don't have the tools. They have different clients. It doesn't matter. They don't need the tools because they don't need to figure it out, okay? Because it's a different social set. So I'm proud of what we've done. I think we're on the right track. We couldn't have done it without you. And we'll continue to accept the challenge, and which brings me back to this. This is just part of that tool, that we need in the classroom, and we'll be happy to bring it back next month to the facilities and ops.
So, thank you, Bill, and I appreciate your passion for it. If we're going to go back to committee, that's fine. We'll table this till then. Let's make sure that we communicate really clearly about what the committee wants to see in the time that we have. Share ideas, make sure that we have a good, productive committee meeting and that we have what we need there so that we can come to consensus about it. Okay.
Okay, we're going to move on to
I'd like to make a motion that we approve action items, education, 7-1. There's only one.
Okay, so
Don't pay attention.
a motion, did I get a second for just 7-1? Okay, so I have a motion and a second to approve conference attendance. Any questions or comments? Do we have to vote? Okay, I'm sorry. That's what I was.
That's all right.
So we need to take a vote to table that
I
motion.
jumped on that.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
good.
All right, rewind, 6.12. We have a motion and a second to table. All in favor? Aye. Okay. Opposed? All right. Motion and a second. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay.
Action, I,
I'd like to make a motion, we approve action items, policies.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the revised policies 808 and 816. That's food services and electronic communications and social media, which Mr. Parker reviewed with us a few times in his committee reports. Any questions or comments on these? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay.
okay, I'll step back in. I know you'll have the opportunity to talk amongst yourselves, and I'm confident there will be a recommendation. We're asking the board to nominate person X for the position of the MCIU board with a 3-year term beginning July 1st of 2018.
I'd like to make a motion to approve Mr. Lindgren for that position.
Does he accept it? Okay.
Just making sure. He's very silent, so I wasn't sure.
We got a motion and a second.
Okay. All in favor for appointing Mr. Lindgren as the MCIU board representative?
Technically nominating. I don't
To
think
nominate,
I
that's
cross
right.
words with you.
Okay, right. So Mark just reminded me, we only nominate, the MCIU board actually does the approval. So we'll vote to nominate Mr. Lindgren. All in favor? Aye. Okay, that's done. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Lindgren, for that piece. We're going to move on
I'd like
to.
to make a motion to approve all committee items, which are really all the action minutes. So that'd be 10, 1, 2, 3, 4.
We have a motion and a second to approve all committee meeting minutes. Policy, athletics, curriculum integration and technology, and operations and facilities. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. So moving on now to new business. Does anybody have any new business for tonight?
4039.
Hush, Mark, hush. All right, I have a couple things. One, I've been thinking about and would like to suggest and recommend to the board that we request for the principals to kind of do a end-of-the-year report for us, things that went well, things that can be tweaked. You know, these are my plans for over the summer to change things. In the May or June meeting, whatever is appropriate for that. Be nice to hear directly from them, how the year went. That's just a thought, if anybody has added thoughts to that.
You want them coming right here and reporting to us, or are they going to give their ideas to Dr. Shirk and he'll filter them down to us?
That's a good question. I think to us, so if we have any questions, then we could ask directly instead of kind of back and forth, back and forth.
Only on that, I agree with you 100%. I'd love to see, as I've mentioned before, I'd love to see the end of the year, as in how our students have done and everything like that. I would hesitate on them coming to report to us. I think they should report to Dr. Shirk, and then Dr. Shirk report at the end of the year. Just my personal opinion.
I'd just like to weigh in my thoughts. It's the busiest time of the year for our principals. And plus you didn't mention directors either, okay? And when you talk about the statistical or data pieces, really, our data season is in September. It's when we get our PSSA scores in July, August. We do all our ECRA analytics. So when we do administrators' goals, we wait till everything's in, and then they forecast for us, Dr. Harney and myself, where, where they saw themselves, and then what tweaks they need to make. So, and we move the Act 93 calendar, if you will, and their agreement based on when all that data comes in, because that's part of their SPP scores that affects their evaluation. So they're almost halfway, they're 6 months in. There's 6 months to go in their year as So if this is something, I would like it, it would make sense for us to start talking about it now so they can prep for the fall and give that information to you then. That's on the cycle of events that would be probably most productive for them and most information for the board.
I wasn't thinking specific to data, but again, I'm open to, maybe the first meeting in September, if you're saying, this is our thoughts from last year. I'd like to hear more than data, in other words. We hear the data, which is great, and I don't want to tie them down, and nothing part of any type of assessment or anything like that. That's
maybe what Mr. Park you could do, and then we could filter that out to the board, is put some of their thoughts down, get them to me, and then we can sort of categorize it, funnel it, think about, and have that conversation as a board, so we're all looking for the same thing, like we're all in agreement to what you'd like to hear. Obviously, there's a data piece, there's a culture piece. I'm not putting words in your mouth, but what exactly you're looking for so we can best give you the information that you need.
Last comment. Sorry if I said this publicly. I know I said it directly to Dr. Harney and Dr. Shirk. Earlier in this school year, I had been at a number of buildings in Methacton and kind of asked around a little bit, and I have to say how impressed I was with the feedback I got on Dr. Harney from that district, especially over the past couple of years. They had some real what seems to me challenges, a school closing, some contract stuff going on. So just want to say kudos to Dr. Harney. Was very well pleased to hear that. And then just today was in another school in Springford, actually, and somebody mentioned to me how impressed he was having worked under Dr. Shirk, and described him in a number of words, but really what stuck out to me is he just, the person he is, and he really cares about the kids. And we don't always see that. So was pleased to hear that. So, I'll continue to give you a hard time, but know that, no, I do appreciate you and the work you do. Thank you.
Mine's really quick. For the last, I think this will be the third year that isn't it? Didn't it start 3 years ago? Third year that the high school has done a service in College Commitment Day, and it's really nice. Parents can come in, eat breakfast with your child, and they wear, the name of the college or whatever service they've committed to. You get your pictures taken, blah, blah, blah. It's really nice. So this year, having a graduating senior, the paper came home, and my daughter said, I can't do it. And I said, why not? She said, it's the same day as Lower Pottsgrove Field Day, and I signed up for Field Day. I think it's a huge shame that the planning, it just seems to me like poor planning. We know the field days are coming. We know that a lot of seniors sign up for them, and I know of at least 5 right off the top of my head that will not be able to attend service in College Commitment Day because they volunteered at Lower Pottsgrove's Field Day. Seniors go, they can drive, they can get there. And it's just a shame because they're opting to miss Commitment Day so that they can go help out at Field Day. And I don't know, I just think, you know what, someone should have looked at a calendar and realized that that was going to be a bad day for a lot of kids. I'm sure there's more than 5 missing it to go volunteer at field day.
The paper just came home, and I don't know who comes up with it, but can that be changed? I don't know how much commitment went into that day, if it can be changed still at this point or not, I don't.
Yeah,
I'm just
that
asking
I
since
don't
it
know.
sounds like
I mean,
you're
it
saying it's
was a, you know, nicely made form, with the date clearly on there. So, you know, I don't know. There's a lot of parents who have it in their hand right now, I would assume. And it's on a Friday, which, I don't know, makes no difference to me what day it is. But, anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. It's just a shame, because there's going to be a lot of kids who are going to miss it. And that was a really nice memory that I had with my son when we did it. And, you know, it was just, it's nice to look back on that.
To piggyback off of yours, it is definitely something that the parents probably enjoy as much, if not more, than the students, getting to go out there and have pictures and such. And I did speak to Pete Robles, who is the PTSA, and he can change any date. Now, obviously, it depends. Obviously, Dr. Ziegler's not here, and he's the one that schedules for the high school. And obviously, we know how busy everything is and such like that. But boy, I would love to have an opportunity if Dr. Shirk had any possibility of rescheduling it, because you are going to lose a good portion of the seniors, especially the ones that are going on to college.
We'll take a look at it tomorrow, first thing, and see if there's any wiggle room. It's a daunting task. There's no excuses. Every position I've held administratively, whether it's a building principal or at this spot, from the last week of April through graduation, it's a daunting task to get everything in without any conflicts. And I will tell you that the administrators that are out there in front of you, we constantly, you know, barter and try to make it work so that, you know, we even think about families that have a 4th grader and a 7th grader. Like, I mean, we really do. So I know at times there's going to be conflicts that could possibly be unavoidable. And I know there's high, you know, who's to say what's a higher priority? You know, we try to treat everything the same. So we will look at it tomorrow and let you know if it's something we can do. And if we can't, then we'll continue to block certain things out as we look at future calendars to try to best get everybody. Wish we had like 35 days in May. We'd be better off. So that would help us. So.
Do we have any, we got the opportunity now for public comment on non-agenda items, but for any other public comment, do we have any requests? Okay, so, yeah. All right, then with that, we'll adjourn tonight's meeting. Thanks, everybody, for coming.